And if we don't have a quorum, it's okay. We'll just proceed with the program.
Okay, and just tell me who I'm looking for in the queue.
Remla Scherzinger, and he'll let us know who else from his team.
Derek.
There's
there's
no
gonna be one
Recording
other.
in progress.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining this special Marina City Council meeting, March 22nd, 2022. We'll ask for a roll call, please. Anita?
Councilmember Medina Dirksen, Councilmember Burnett, Councilmember Berkeley,
here.
Mayor Pro Tem Viola, Mayor Delgado.
Here. All right, so we don't have a quorum, and that's okay. We're not having any action item. So we'll proceed with the program tonight and move Derek Cray over as a panelist. Anybody else from MCWD that Lane or Matt, you want to move over? Please, let's do that. We're going to move into a Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. Would anyone like to volunteer to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance after a moment of silence? All right, Lane, our city manager, thank you very much. Please proceed.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you, Lane. We're going to move into a study session, and at this point, I'll turn it over either to our city manager, Lane Long, or our fire chief, Doug McCowan.
Great. I'll just frame it really quickly from here. One of the questions that I've gotten in scheduling this meeting is why are we even doing this meeting? And so the reason that we're doing this is there have been some comments out in the public and some different misinformation and things floating around social media. And so we just wanted to take an opportunity to hear straight from our water district and from our fire chief on the capacities and the capabilities of our fire system infrastructure, our water infrastructure, to provide everything that we needed to do in a fire emergency situations. We take it very seriously. We say one of the primary reasons cities exist is for the public health, safety, and welfare. And that is a top priority of the city council, always has been, will always be. We have one of the most respected fire chiefs in Monterey County with Chief McCowan, and he takes very seriously his job as fire chief and making sure that we have the appropriate infrastructure to address these fire structural needs and concerns. What we won't be talking about tonight is anything about fire staffing or fire stations or locations or anything like that. This is strictly to talk about our water infrastructure and the capacity and the capability of that to meet our fire needs. And since the Marina Coast Water District, they own the water system infrastructure, that is their responsibility to not only to build that, but also to maintain that. And then there's a lot of coordination between our city and MCWD to ensure that the appropriate infrastructure is in place. And in their presentations, they'll discuss how we coordinate our responses to fire situations and to maintaining our whole water system infrastructure. This is not set up to be a debate with the public or anything like that. This is a study meeting. We wanted the council to have the ability, as we make the presentations, if you have questions, just go ahead and you ask it to, I think Derek is making the primary presentation, but feel free to ask Chief McCowan and Derek or Rem any questions throughout the presentation. I think at the conclusion, if there's members of the public in their 4 minutes that that have questions or comments, we want to do that, but we don't want to get into a public debate. We're bringing the knowledgeable people, and they're going to explain in great detail our whole water system and our infrastructure. And so we really appreciate our partners with Marina Coast Water District. We spend a lot of time together, and it's good to have them here tonight in our meeting. And
Okay, Lane, let me jump in with a couple sort of housekeeping items. I wanted to welcome Councilmember Kathy Biala, who's on Marina City Council, of course. She's our Mayor Pro Tem. And Carlos Vega is, in my mind, our Assistant Fire Chief, but I don't know your official title.
Division Chief.
Division Chief, thank you. So good to see you with us tonight, Carlos. And on the Marina Coast Water District side, we have their General Manager, Rem Scherzinger, and Derek Cray. And then we also have one of their elected officials, Gail Morton, who's on the Board of Directors of the Marina Coast Water District. Jan Schreiner, I believe, is their president. She is also on their board. She is here. Matt Zefferman is on their board, and he is here as well. And if anyone else joins us from MCWD's side of the house, we'll try to welcome them. So as far as the flow of tonight, we're definitely going to start with a presentation. Is it going to be the Marina, or is it going to be Marina Coast Water District first?
Fire Chief will do it first.
So our Fire Chief, Doug McCowan, will give a presentation. After that presentation, do we want to have council questions, comments?
Yes.
Okay. And then after council questions, comments, we would launch into Marina Coast Water District. And
Yes.
then we'd have council questions, comments on Marina Coast Water District's presentation. And then we would turn over to the public for their questions and comments, so that
Correct.
the public would get one bite at the apple, Lane, and
Correct.
council would get 2 bites at the apple. Is that how you see it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So with that, let's turn it back to you, Lane, and you can.
Okay, I think
introduce the next speaker.
we're ready for Chief McCowan. So Matt, if you'll pull up his presentation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and welcome members of the Marina Coast Water District. I'm going to introduce this subject tonight and talk about a few things. I'm going to talk about our Marina Coast Water emergency procedures, water we use at a fire flow, and also I want to talk about the independent ISO rating a little bit. So the Marina Coast Water District and the Marina Fire Department worked together, and they developed a plan for response to fire. Now, at all times, the Marina Coast Water District responds to fires upon our request. And we've always requested the Marina Coast Water to notify them of a significant incident. But what we've done, we've kind of taken this plan a little bit step further. So it's our procedures now that anytime we have a fire, whether it's a small fire or a larger fire, we notify the Marina Coast Water District so they can implement their side of the plan. They start monitoring the water use, they start looking at their tank levels. And we also try to advise them of, the significant type of fire, if it's very significant or not. Whether we're going to use a large fire flows, for example, on a major commercial fire where we're going to be using 4,000 or 5,000 gallons a minute of water or more, or if we have multiple fires or things like that. So a good example of this has worked very well since we've implemented it. So we do it on whether or not it's a real small fire to the big fires. And so we build that muscle memory so we don't ever leave them out. In fact, I'm sure you're well aware, we've just had a few significant fires in the past week. And, both times, Marina Coast Water has been very responsive. It's worked exactly like it's supposed to per plan. And water is not an issue at none of them. So that's kind of what happens when we do get a fire. I want to talk a little bit too about how much water we actually use. So each pumper typically will pump about 1,500 gallons per minute. So like in this picture, when you look at the monitor shooting water on this fire here, that monitor is probably putting out right around 800 to 1,000 gallons a minute of water. Now for this particular fire, this was on a reservation in California, I believe. You know, we finally got a second truck in service, and we had, you know, some hand lines. And I think Marina Coast actually has the ability to pull up how much water we're using. But I would just imagine even at max time, we're probably around 3,000 gallons a minute of water. So because we had 1.3 large streams of water going on this fire. You know, if we have a bigger building, we're gonna need more. If we go to a single family dwelling, like these houses we've had, you know, typically each hand line can put out 2 to 250 gallons of water, or even a little bit less. And everything's situational, but that's probably the average is about 200 gallons a minute. And, you know, we had 3 hand lines on the fire. So, you know, we're under 1,000 gallons a minute typically on a single family residence. You know, if it's a larger fire that gets going before we put water on, obviously we're going to use more water. But those are kind of, to put this whole thing in perspective, kind of gives you a overview of the water actually used at a fire. The question's been brought up, when do we do, or how do we know about fire flow? How do we know that, for example, the Spring Hill Suites Marriott, how do we know that there's enough water to properly supply the fire protection system? So every time we have a new development that's going to be a sprinkler, and with an NFPA 13, we have to do a fire flow test. And the way this works is we go out to the site. For example, right here for the Marriott, we would have went out to right there at 2nd Avenue and 8th or 9th, in that area, on that system, on that line, and we will flow the hydrants and measure the exact water that's coming out at that point in the water system. So a good example for this building, because of the pressure and the flows, there's actually a fire pump in this one. So the water goes into this building, there's enough volume, but there wasn't enough pressure to make the sprinkler system operate as to be as designed. And then you go all the way to the other, another good example is the Hampton Inn that's going up across by Walmart. That building, same size, 4 stories, will not need a fire pump. There's enough sufficient water right there at that corner that the sprinkler system is going to work as designed. And so every new building, every new development, every new sprinkler system is when the contractor will contact the Marina Fire Department, and we will work with Marina Coast Water District, because they need to know when we're flowing their hydrants. And we will go out there and flow and see how much water we actually have. And this way we know exactly that we have enough water for the development, for the building, for the sprinkler system, and also enough for any firefighting efforts we may have. So I just wanted, you know, to let folks know that we do measure the water for every new sprinkler system that goes in. So lastly, I kind of want to touch base on the ISO. So this is considered a public protection classification. The final community classification for the city of Marina is called the 3 and the 3Y. And when they do the classifications, they're measuring they measured communication system, they measured a fire department, they measured a water supply, amongst other things. And this is an independent research association. We didn't, we provide data, we help them, flow hydrants if needed or whatever, but they're the ones that take the data and they're the ones that verify the data and they're the ones that produce the report. So for the water supply, that's what we're talking about. There's a total of 40, that's 40% of the total classification, which is significant. So they grade the water supply system, the hydrant sizes, type and installation, and then inspection and flow testing of hydrants are the three areas that they measure when they measure the water system. So to give credit for a water system, they 30 points, 30 out of that 40 points is for the water supply system. And ISO graded our water supply system at 29.54. So we didn't even lose a full half a point, or say half a point. For hydrant size, types and installations, let's make sure that we have the proper hydrants around our commercial establishments, our residentials, the spacing and everything else. There's 3 points and we got all 3 points. Where we lost points on that section of the rating is for the inspection and flow testing of hydrants. There's 7 points available. And we got 3.2. And that's because, the only time we really flow hydrants is during new construction. We don't have an annual maintenance system on our hydrants. So those were the areas I wanted to talk about, and then I'd like to turn it over to the water company.
Doug, yeah, before we do that, can you clarify for the public that the ISO rating of 3, is that a good rating, a bad rating? So they understand what that 3 rating really means.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so the rating for ISO goes from 1 to 10. And 10 is basically no fire protection, or the fire protection is further than 5 miles and with no water system, no hydrants. So a class 1, I know that LA cities are considered a class 1. There are a lot of class 2 departments around, and class 3 is actually pretty well for the city of Marina, for our current staffing, our current equipment, and our current fire station locations. The 3 is very well. I could see where we could get down to definitely a class 2 just by the time when we finish our staffing and get down to our station locations. But a 3 is very, very good.
Doug, is that,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, Doug, please continue. I apologize.
No, I was just gonna say, I think I would just be, I'm gonna try to tell you what some of our other local departments have, but I could tell you that 3 is very well.
All right, was that the end of your presentation, Doug, or do you have more tonight?
That's really what I had tonight, because I wanted to frame it and kind of stated the subject, and so available for questions or
Okay,
whatever we have.
all right. Does any council person have questions, comments? Go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem Kathy Biala.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So you said that we got a little decrease in our points because we don't have annual inspections. Is that planned to be, or Doug?
With this, I want to let Marina Coast Water help answer that question, but at this point, and they might add on what their plans are, but we don't have plans internally at this point.
Okay, Doug, can you explain if 7 points were possible on flow testing and we got 3, can you explain why it's not critical that we try to increase that score? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's very important. It's important to do. And it's inspection and flow testing. Hydrants should have an annual testing where you exercise the valves and exercise, the hydrant caps, and typically is what a fire department will do. We're just kind of not at the point yet to really take on that.
Is that because we're short on staffing, or it's not normally the fire department's job?
No, it's normally a fire department function, that part of it. And it's mostly staffing and, it's just, having enough time in a day.
Okay. Kathy, do you have more?
Yeah, this is a simple question. So the water.
Kathy, before you go on, Kathy, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if you had more on that particular point, but if you don't have more on that particular point, let's hear from MCWD, and then we'll go back to you, Kathy, for your other points.
Thank you.
Okay, Derek Cray, did you want to provide input?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Delgado. I was just going to really quickly touch on that. In my presentation, I'm actually going to talk about fire hydrant maintenance and what MCWD is currently doing, and then how we are ramping up the program. So we just want to stay tuned for, hopefully I won't keep you guys for an hour, but it is in that presentation, and I'll talk about maintenance.
Okay, and maintenance, does that include flow testing and whether we need better flow testing to get a better score or not?
I will touch upon that. Mostly right now, the program's going to talk about, as far as maintenance goes, ensuring all the ports open up, greasing, lubing, making sure the hydrants flow, painting them, and doing maintenance around them. And then flow testing for MCWD, eventually we would like to implement a more robust program, but in the meantime, it's a priority just to do the maintenance on all of them.
Okay, thank you, Derek. Go ahead, Kathy, if you had more.
Yeah, so I'm assuming that that is the optimum that we'd like to see in the future if we have the capabilities is an annual inspection. Can I safely say that? Whether right now we don't have the capacity, but that is certainly a goal of ours. Can I say that? Can you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're always striving, there's a lot of things in the fire department that, we're not doing just because of staffing and other things, we don't have the administrative staff and we don't have the line staff, but things we're working on, and we've talked about that at, our other meetings, but there's definitely a lot of those types of things that, we want to put together a program that right now is just a bandwidth.
Okay, thank you. And then just one quick question. So all the water that we're using to put out fires, it is potable quality water. We're not using any. Okay, thank you. That's it for now.
Okay, and I had a question. You mentioned, Doug, that Hampton Inn, we have enough water at Hampton Inn. But before that, I thought you said we don't have enough water at Spring Hill Suites. Did I mishear that?
No, yeah, we have enough water. There's two sides of to make a sprinkler system work or even a fire hose work. There's two things you need. You need volume and pressure. So the volume is just the amount of water available. So for example, on the Spring Hill Suite, we have a lot of water, but because of the design of the system, you remember on the Spring Hill Suite, the water comes in off the side and goes up a hill before it even gets into the Spring Hill Suite. And we lose about 8 pounds for every 10 feet of elevation change. And then it has to still go up another 4 stories. And actually we have that, the building on top to have to be protected. So those sprinkler calculations were done right as I got here, or, before I actually got here. But, the sprinkler contractor said to make it work, you have the water, we need more pressure. So that, why we have a fire pump there. We have couple other buildings, the Target has a fire pump, and, you know, there's some other buildings. And it's more of a system volume, not a volume issue, but a pressure issue to make the whole sprinkler system work as designed. Because they have to meet some pretty strict design criteria to be effective.
Okay, so if there was a fire somewhere in the Spring Hills, anywhere in the Spring Hill Suites, is there adequate infrastructure to give the fire department what it needs to do what they normally would do?
Yes.
So how do we make that transition from there's not enough water to we have adequate infrastructure to take care of a fire?
We have enough water. We've had the volume. It needed some more pressure to work on the top floors.
Okay, and that
That's what the fire
pressure,
pump does.
okay, so there's a pump on site or we use a pump from
No,
Target or something?
there's a pump in the building.
Okay, so because there's not enough pressure coming to the building, there's a pump on site that increases that pressure so that we have adequate pressure should we need it.
Yes. But anywhere in that building, and that's part of the design review process. That's why we flow the hydrants. So when we flow the hydrants, we find out two things. We find out how much water is available all the way down to 20 pounds residual in the hydrant in the system. So reflow that system. I might start at 55, 60 PSI. And however many openings we have to open up and flow water, you know, which is a kind of another reason we flow hydrants as much is because of all the water that sometimes can be used. But we open up all the hydrants and we bring it down at least 10, 15 pounds. And then we have a calculation that will take it down to 20 pounds. Now that tell us pressure, volume, and all those things we need. And then the sprinkler contractor takes all that information, feeds it in a computer, and they have to calculate to the furthest head. So they have to go to the furthest point from where the water comes into the building and make sure that furthest sprinkler head operates just as well as the one right next to the water. And usually on an NFPA 13, they're doing a 4 or 8 head, depending on the hazard calculation. So that's 4 to 8 heads flowing all at once and make sure we have enough pressure and volume at those heads to flow properly.
Thank you. Let's go to Councilmember Lisa Berkeley.
Thank you. Doug, you just described what goes before the design review board. Can you tell me how often, or tell us how often are the systems checked? Like you mentioned, like the pressurizer in Spring Hill Suites. How often does that get checked in other systems? And in what way are they checked?
So there's 2 inspections for sprinkler systems. There is a annual inspection, and then there's a 5-year inspection. And they need to be done by a certified sprinkler company. A C16 licensed contractor has to do them. We don't do them, and the owner of the building can't do them. Now, as far as following to make sure, when we do a business license inspection, we check for that. Some comes across, we check for that. And I know that the Marriott, for example, and also the Target building, and there's some other buildings in town, those are corporate buildings. Those corporations are down too, because they're in communication with us to check it. So there's the annual and the 5-year.
Terrific. Thank you. Those are all my questions for right now.
All right, thank you. Let's go back to Mayor Pro Tem Biala.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In your fire plan, do you accommodate for scenarios that might be unlikely, but let's say you had a fire in Target and then you also had a fire someplace in downtown of a single family dwelling. You have sort of the capacities for individual facilities, but does your plan also account for those kinds of things where there's multiple demands at one time for water?
Yeah, and I think that when Marina Coast does their backup plans and, when we've been going over the water systems, they have the capacity to really ramp up and supply our water needs. They have ways I let them describe that, but they have ways to move water, get different tanks involved and everything else, and that's why the plan is, and we make a kind of muscle memory is every fire, we contact them. And so we also not only get that face-to-face time, it helps them exercise, the plan on their side of the equation too, whether they show up and work with us right from the command post, or whether it's by a phone call, or, it depends on the size of the incident. And so if we did have a fire at Target, and we did have another fire in the city, we'll have somebody at our command post to be able to face, and so they would know exactly what they're doing. And they'll talk about how they can monitor their water system and know what they're flowing and where.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's go back to Councilmember Lisa Berkeley.
Sorry, that was still from before. I'm sorry.
Okay. Then let's move on to Marina Coast Water District.
Mayor, if I could make just one more comment on that ISO rating of 3, as I think the chief talked about, we're always interested in improving that rating, but the 3 is really an excellent rating for a city our size. If you put a bell curve across the United States and all fire departments, we're in the top 7.5% of that bell curve with that rating of 3. And so while you can always put a lot more money and resources and improve that rating, a 3 really is an excellent rating. It's not meaning that we aren't going to improve. I just want everyone to understand that it's a really good rating, and it's a really safe rating.
All right. Thank you, Lane. And we have Tony Akel. Did I say that right, Tony? You're muted, but let's turn it over to Marina Coast Water District. And Tony, how do you say your last name?
Akel, you pronounced it correct. Thank you for asking.
All right, I got lucky. Thank you, Tony, for joining us. And you're with Marina Coast Water District, I assume?
I'm a consultant that works with Marina Coast Water District, correct?
All right. Thank you, Tony. All right, Derek, I think, or Rem, you want to take it from here?
I will. So yes, I will take it over here. So good evening, Mayor Delgado and City Council and members of the audience via Zoom. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of Marine Coast. So for those that don't know me, I'm Derek Cray. I'm the Operations and Maintenance Manager here for Marine Coast District. And so I'm going to piggyback off the chief's presentation. However, I'm going to be talking more about Marine Coast Water District system characteristics, along with how we operate and maintain the system. And then after my presentation, I'm going to turn it over to our consultant, Tony Akel from Akel Engineering. He's going to talk about the modeling of the system, how that plays into the district's master plans, and then I'll turn it back over to me to sum it up, and I'll be available for questions. So anytime, feel free to stop me if you have questions. With that, would someone mind putting the presentation on the screen? Thank you. And then we can go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so overview of Marine Coast Water District system. So we operate and maintain 215 miles of water main. So that is within the entire service area. So within Central Marina, it's about 55 miles of pipeline. That pipeline ranges in size from 4-inch in diameter to 30-inch. So we got some smaller lines to very large lines. We have 7 production water wells. They're all potable. Pumping rates anywhere from 1,400 gallons a minute to 2,400 gallons a minute. So these are all very large water wells. And then we have 8 storage reservoirs located throughout the district at different capacities. The smallest being 0.17 million gallons to the largest being 2 million gallons. The other thing we have are 18 pressure reducing stations. And so we take water from higher elevations and gravity flows in the lower elevations. And if we did not have these pressure reducing stations or pressure reducing valves, it would have a high pressure in the system, which cause negative impacts. So these pressure reducing stations, which I'll talk a little bit more later, actually reduce the pressure in the system throughout the zones. And then we also have 5 system interties, and what that is it's the intertie between Fort Ord system and Central Marina. So this is again for redundancy and allows the system to flow both ways, either into Central Marina or out of Central Marina into Fort Ord. So what does this mean? So this equates to a system average pressure of 60 PSI throughout our service area. Next slide, please. So this is pretty small, probably on your screen, but this is a good overview of our service area and our pipelines. And really what I want to focus on is the red and the yellow, because that's what feeds Central Marina and the Ord portion of Marina. And so the red pipelines that you see there is A zone, what we call it. And that is the majority of Central Marina. And then that yellow section there is the east side of Central Marina, and then the Ord, Abrams, Schoonover Park area, and also the Marina Airport. That is B zone. So really we're going to focus, we have a wide service area as you can see, but we're going to focus on Central Marina and the Ord community of Marina. So with that, next slide, please. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more about the characteristics, again, within Central and the Ord community of Marina. So I mentioned there are 2 pressure zones, A, which is that red line that feeds the majority of Central Marina. So that is the biggest pressure zone that we have. And that has a hydraulic gradient line of 220 feet. What I like to think of that level is that is the level of water in the tank, basically from sea level. So it's 220 feet in the air is that HGL within A zone. And so why is that HGL important? That is what dictates the pressure throughout the zone. And as the chief mentioned earlier, you know, when you raise the elevation, you will lose pressure. So our tanks are always sitting at a high point, and then we flow gravity downwards. And then when it gets too high a pressure, we put in what are called those pressure reducing valves to reduce pressure into normal operating range. The other zone that we have is the B zone, and that has an HGL of 314 feet. So again, B zone, 314 feet above sea level, A zone, 220 feet above sea level, and that is the water line in our tanks. A zone, majority of Central Marina. So pressure range in that zone is anywhere from 40 at the high point of the zone, because there's less head from the tank to the high point, all the way down to, or I should say up to 90 PSI at the low point of Central Marina. The other thing that we do have is we have redundancy in A zone, and so we have those pressure reducing valves to add additional capacity. So we have the ability to actually flow water to another zone. For instance, in this case, we can pull water into B zone, which is a higher pressure, and then put it into A zone. And so that's really dictated on demand. So if demand increases, such as fire flow, these pressure reducing valves will begin to open up and let water flow into these zones. Normal operating, we just work off head pressure of the tank. So that's again redundancy for additional flows such as fire flows. The other zone, oh, I'm sorry, can you go back one? So the other zone is B zone, and so that's the eastern portion of Central Marina or community, and then also the Marina Fire, or I'm sorry, the Marina Airport, excuse me. And so pressure range is there between 50 and 90 PSI. And then we actually have in that zone as well 2 pressure reducing valves to pull water from a higher zone, which would be called C zone, into B for redundancy. Next slide, please. All right, so next we're going to talk about the flow capacities and really what do we have to feed these zones. And so that's important when there is a fire. And so A zone capacity, we have our wells and boosters. So we have 7 production wells, and we can produce approximately 1,300 gallons a minute. And then on top of 3 booster pumps, which are located on Beach Road. That's that big green tank at the end of Beach Road, the 2 million gallon reservoir. There's a booster station there that can pump another 4,650 gallons a minute into the system there. So as the chief mentioned earlier, you may be pulling 800 gallons a minute to 1,200 out of fire hose, maybe 1,500. We have the ability to put in the system in A zone that much GPM. With that, we also have storage capacity in the zone. So we have that 2 million gallon reservoir, which is that green tank again at the end of Beach Road. And then we have the 167,000 gallon reservoir, 0.16 million gallons at Polk County Road. So that's the, it used to be a nice red color tank sitting on top of the hill there. And currently went under rehab, which will be on the next slide. But we have those 2 tanks for storage capacity. And then we're currently building and very excited for this project, 2 additional tanks, 1.6 million gallon reservoirs to be constructed or currently under construction right next to the City of Marina's courtyard. And those will essentially kind of replace the 167,000 gallon tank and be additional storage for A zone. So we're adding a significant amount of storage into A zone, which again is the large portion of Central Marina. And then it also is the forebay to feed our other zones. So we can pull out of those 2 1.6 million gallon reservoirs and then pump them into larger, or I'm sorry, up the hill to other tanks. And then again, we have the ability to flow 2 million gallons of storage from our B tank into A zone through those PRVs if need be. And then B zone, we have a source capacity with our boosters of 2,800 gallons a minute. In our storage tanks, we have 2 million gallon reservoir that's located there on Colonel Durham. It's that concrete, partially buried tank. And then we have the ability to flow 4 million gallons of storage into B zone through a higher zone, zone C, through 2 different tanks there, tanks C1 and C2, which are each 2 million gallons. So quite a bit of storage and a big addition when we have those 2 reservoirs come online soon. So next slide, please. All right, storage improvements. So I talked about that nice red color tank that we used to have, and that wasn't rust, it was painted red from the Army, but that's called our intermediate reservoir. That's the 176,000 gallon, 167,000 gallon tank. So that recently got recoated on the inside and outside. And then on the right there is those 2 tanks I'm talking about. That's construction of A1 right there. We now actually have a 3rd ring up. But that's sitting next to the city's courtyard, and that'll bring an additional 3.2 million gallons of storage into A zone. Slide, please. So the chief talked about earlier in his presentation about Marina Coast Water District and the ability to monitor, and we do have that ability via our SCADA. SCADA is an acronym for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition, and it's the ability for us to monitor what is going out and going on in our system, either locally or remotely. And so we can monitor, and we do monitor for our storage tank levels. So how much water is in our tank, volume and level, our wells and booster, the status of them, so whether they're running or they're off, our flow rates coming out of those, and then we also monitor dosage and residual, along with or numerous other things such as power status and is it standby generator running, did the ATS switch over? So a lot of data is coming into our SCADA system. With that, if there is an issue, we have a redundant alarming system that will send a notification out to our standby operators. So if, for instance, there's a low tank level or pump's not kicking on, that's going to call an operator right away, and they'll respond either remotely to try to take care of the issue, or they'll come in. And Marina Coast has 2 standby operators. The supervisor is always available, as well as myself. And we have mechanisms in there to ensure that someone will always receive an alarm. So there's a lot of different redundant mechanisms in there. So next slide, please. So some improvements that we're doing currently, and this is really focused on this presentation, the fire flows. So we're adding live pressure monitoring throughout our pressure zones. And so this will be integrated directly in our SCADA, and it'll give us feedback every couple seconds as to what pressure is at different points within that particular pressure zone. And so I am happy to say that A zone is complete already. And so we get live readings into our SCADA system. So for instance, if a hydrant was opened and we started to see low pressure, it's going to ping the operator right away and say, hey, there's something going on, there's low pressure. And at that point, that operator would sign in remotely and take a look and contact the city if it's a issue, or try to resolve it if it's not fire flow related. The other thing we're working on right now is getting so A zone is complete, and we're working on getting B and D zone. And so I hope to have that completed in the next 3 months. The project we're doing in-house, and my maintenance and operations staff are working hard to get a lot of conduit in and a lot of sensors, and so we can get that integrated into our SCADA system. So again, everything has alarm settings. So there are high pressure and low pressure alarms to individual pressure stations. Next slide, please. All right, so hydrant ownership and maintenance and repairs. So we do, MCWD owns and maintains the hydrants within our service area. So there are approximately 1,664 fire hydrants. So there's, quite a few within our service area that we maintain. Maintenance for us includes greasing the stem. That's really to ensure that, you can open and close the hydrant smoothly, making sure that the hydrant opens and closes all the way. There are times that a stem may get bent. Painting the hydrant, so whether it's graffiti removal or just painting a faded hydrant so the fire department can see it more readily at night. And so right now work on that is performed as time permits, but that is a program that we are ramping up currently. And so I plan on having a guy full-time out there going around each hydrant and performing what I just mentioned, along with doing maintenance work such as removing weeds that are around us. Sometimes they get grown around hydrants. So again, the fire hydrant or the fire department can see them. So we have a lot of hydrants, but I hope to have the program completed sometime in the next 12 to 18 months. And that'll really give us a good indicator that, we've been to all hydrants, and a good indicator of if there's any issues that we can address ASAP. One thing I want to touch upon, though, if we do find a hydrant for some reason not functioning or it fails, that isn't something that we put in our CMS and we put on a list and we'll get to it when we get to it. That's no, immediately we'll go out and repair that hydrant. So depending on the nature of it, it may be we call in a USA, wait 48 hours, and then have to dig up the street, or maybe it's just something wrong with the actual hydrant itself, and we can turn a valve off, unbolt it, and put a new hydrant on. But any hydrant that's found failed or hit, that's always put on a priority list for district to replace. So I kind of wanted to mention that separately from the maintenance of it. The other thing I want to touch upon is our procedure guidelines and design requirements. And so as part of our requirement, we require hydrants to be spaced 300 feet apart. NFPA recommends 500 basically in residential. It's flow based. or up to 300 feet in commercial areas. So we're putting them at 300 feet regardless. So, the fire department, in an instance that a fire hydrant didn't work, there should be always one right down the road to hook onto. But it's always our goal to make sure everything's functioning, and we will repair it immediately if there's a problem with it. So next slide, please. All right, so this one, the chief showed a picture earlier of that fire there on reservation, and I believe it was the 400 block of reservation. And so what I have here is there's a lot going on, but this is a SCADA trend of what was actually happening in our system at the time of this large commercial fire. And so there's a red arrow there at the top left, which is basically the approximate start of the fire. And then running down from there, the top one is that intermediate tank reservoir, which is one of the main reservoirs feeding into that particular zone. And so you'll see, it kind of just stays steady after the fire. And then when we go down below, those other lines are pumps or wells running. And so during this time, there were 2 wells running. We had well 30 and Watkins Gate. And at that same time, we were still performing our normal operations of filling the rest of the system like we normally do. So the system ran perfect during this. And what I'm going to do on the next slide here is I'm going to compare it to the very next day when there wasn't a fire at the same time. And so here's a non-fire day. Different wells running, and that's just because the way our logic is. And so I want a well to run basically every day if possible for water quality. And so they just automatically rotate. But 2 wells running at that same time, 31 and 34 this time. You'll see that tank is flatline, and then we are filling the rest of the system up as well. So system performed on a fire day the same as it performed on a non-fire day. Next slide. So here's a little bit more breakdown. We'll get a little more granular on that. And so during the fire, the 2 wells that were running had a flow rate of approximately 3,700 gallons a minute. And then the next day, the 2 wells were actually flowing more in a non-fire day, 4,200 gallons a minute. And that's just, again, because of the different wells running and how much a well can pump, because one well only pump 2,400 gallons a minute and one pumps 1,600 gallons a minute. So no noticeable drop or change in our operating parameters during the fire. Next slide, please. All right, this we'll talk about. I'll talk a little bit more on the coordination that the chief talked about between the fire department and the district. And we really do coordinate well. And so, as the chief talked about, there was a couple fires, unfortunately, recently. And as soon as those fires happened, or when I should say, when the fire department responded, they notified our standby operator, letting them know, hey, there's a fire, it's approximate size. We're going to be pulling out of hydrant. We'll let you know. And then at that time, the operator will get on, take a look at the system, monitor it, make sure it's fine. Again, we have those alarms, but I still want eyes on the system to ensure that it's my job or Marina Coast's job to ensure there's enough water volume and pressure for the city. And so anytime there's that fire, we're going to watch it. And depending on how large the fire it is, so if it's a real large fire, at that point, then the supervisor and myself most likely will be coming in, and we'll have boots on the ground with our operators as well, and beginning our emergency response plan on a large fire. And so what that could mean is we have the ability to turn on more pumps manually. So the SCADA system or the water system runs automatically, but we have the ability to really manipulate our water system. We also have the ability to open those pressure reducing valves even more. And so I talked about that earlier, is we're bringing higher pressure zones into lower pressure zones. And so they go through those pressure reducing valves. Those are set at a specific pressure, really not to overpressurize the system. But in a large fire, when fire departments hook up to numerous hydrants, we do have the ability to open those up more and feed more pressure into the system to ensure or volume, I should say, volume and pressure to ensure there's adequate flow and pressure for the fire department. So fortunately, that's something we haven't had to do, but we just have that. We have that ability with the redundancy in the system. Next slide, please. All right, so with that, I talked about the operations and the maintenance of the actual system. And then what we want to talk about next is how we model the system. This is a computer-based model of our actual water system, and then how that plays into the master plans. And so with that, I'd like to bring on Tony Akel, which is from Akel Engineering, who helped write our master plans and model the system, and to go over that a little more in depth.
Thank you, Derek, and welcome, Tony.
Hi, Mayor Delgado, council members, it's a pleasure to be here and talk a little bit about the master plan approach and the model that Derek just mentioned. Derek talked about the actual system operations. He talked about the actual fire flow response in the system. And this can all be actually confirmed by the model. What is the model? It's a computer application that mimics how the actual field operation works. The water district invested in building this model. It was a big effort. It's a GIS based, and it has been validated and compared to SCADA, compared to field conditions, field pressures. So we have good confidence in the level of the model. We're a specialty firm. I've been doing this for 30 years, over 30 years actually. So in this case, the computer simulation was modeled, and there's a mention of master plans. What are master plans? Just briefly here. The master plan is developed for an entire system to, number one, evaluate the existing system, evaluate its capacity adequacy. How is it responding to fire? How is it responding to daily operation? Do we have enough storage? Are the pump stations adequately sized? So that looks at the existing system, but it's also master plan. Master plan means and implies that it's intended to plan into the future and support the general plan. So those are the two things. Who looks at the existing system, looks also at projecting through the horizon of the master plan, making sure we identify what improvements need to be made to support the general plan. And as such, we have to go into a conservative approach. We have to cover our bases. We have to make sure we have considered potentials that happen into the system, not actual day-to-day operations. We know actual day-to-day operations, system is going to be operating well. And Derek is confirming that. There's no doubt the model can confirm that as well. We want to make sure that if we get hypotheticals into the system, are we covered? How is the system going to respond to a hypothetical fire that doesn't happen on any day, that happens on the worst day of the year, of the worst month of the year? And that's called maximum day demand. Maximum day demand is the hottest day of the year. Everyone is using the water, it's high water use, and the fire hits. Can the system fight that fire? That's what we'll look at, maximum day. So that's approach number one. Next slide, please. And a little bit about maximum day. The way we develop that is we look at statistics, historical statistics. At one time, in this case here in Marina Coast, the criteria we used, maximum day is 2 times higher than your average day of the year. You can have lower days in the winter, but on the average, there's a day that's called an average. But for simulating the fire, the worst day of the year we think is 2.0 based on historicals. The table on the right is from the master plan, and it looked, historically when at one point in time we were at 2.0. But if you look at the 3-year trend, that maximum day has been trending down. People are using less water. People are not using as much during the maximum day. So, the 3-year average suggests 1.8 times average. And then the most recent trends are saying even lower. And this is not just Marina Coast. This is, statewide. We are seeing that trend. Nevertheless, in this master plan, we stayed with the 2.0 factor, which is considered very conservative. 2.0 was very common many years back. Now, 2.0 is on the very conservative side. This is what we used in the master plan to evaluate fire flows, a factor of 2.0. And that's one of the conservative approaches that we maintained. Next slide, please. Then, conservative approach number 2. The master plan escalated the existing demands. In the model, we simulate actual demands. What are the maximum actual demands for that we've observed? But we go further than that. We say, okay, those are the demands that are observed, but there's a vacancy rate in the system. So not all the homes are occupied, not all the businesses are occupied. What if that happens? So this is where the model comes in, and we say, let's assume that all the homes, all the businesses are occupied, and for the whole simulation here. So we raise the demand even further. So that's another safety factor that we add. Is it likely? Not likely, but in certain areas it might be likely. We might see an area 100% occupied. Did we lose the presentation? There it is. So we simulate that conservative. Conservative approach number 3. We use a conservative velocities as a criteria for judging the capacity adequacy of the pipeline. Velocity is how fast water travels into the pipeline. If it goes way too fast, if we allow it to go too fast, it might impact the pipelines. And if it's an aging pipeline, we don't know what can happen based on material. We don't want to expose our pipelines to high velocities. So you might see some areas using 10 feet per second or higher. Here we use the conservative factor. We wanted to make sure that the system is protected. The pipelines are protected, especially the aged one. These will be replaced in time, but we don't want them to fail before we get to them. And then lastly, approach number 4, we assume that we are using a single hydrant. And this is common in master plans. Let's assume we use one hydrant at a time. Can we fight the fire? In reality, if there's a fire that is large enough larger than we expect, the fire department at their discretion, they can tap on the second hydrant across the street, or a few hundred feet away. They can tap on those and just to surround the fire. But for planning purposes, we used one hydrant at a time. So again, this is a conservative approach. So you can see from all of these approaches, the master plan is intended on purpose to be conservative. Next slide, please. And I couldn't leave you without showing you a screen capture of what the hydraulic model looks like. So you see here, this is a screen capture. On the top, it's a menu like Microsoft Word. On the left-hand side, these are layers that we show, like streets or pipelines, turn them on or off, or the background. Sometimes we bring an aerial photo. On the right-hand side, it's a database. There's a lot of data on this model, and results also. We can see the results. And the pipelines, you see the pipelines are shown in blue, and their sizes are shown here. The dark blue are 8 inches, and the lighter blues are 6 inches. And in this case, it was a simulation where we wanted to see where's the weakness part of the system. And the weakness part of the system was on the cul-de-sacs. And that's common. You see the weakness, the red dots are on the cul-de-sacs. They are less than we would like them to be, but that's very common in any system. You go to a cul-de-sac and you see less pressure because it's not looped. That's why many criteria allow for and are forgiving when it comes to a cul-de-sac and say, we allow you half that capacity. You can go down and fight that fire from 2 hydrants and you'll be able to get the criteria. But then I wanted to show you this screen to show you what the model does. And this is the tool that the water district invested in to evaluate the system. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And with that, I turn back to Derek.
You're muted, Derek.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. Yeah, so in closing, the modeling is, as Mr. Kell mentioned, is really an assumption of the worst case scenario. It's used to design an extremely robust distribution system, and really to meet a fully occupied system on the worst day of the year at a velocity of 7 feet per second. And so, really I want to point out that we have redundant ways to move water into our system. We are fortunate in that means there are a lot of systems that don't have that redundancy to move water into different zones. If we have to, we will operate past that 7 feet per second. And then we will increase pressure within the system too, if we need be. And that's where the coordination between the city, fire department, and Marina Coast comes into play, because, the fire department is going to contact our operators and say, we have everything hit the fan. We have, 4-alarm fire, and I don't know if that's the right term or not, but we need more pressure and volume. There's something going on, and we're going to have our operators out there on site to remedy that. And some of that remedy might be increasing the pressure in the system. So again, the city does a very good job of coordinating with the district on any issues, and as well as just keeping us informed of when there is a fire. That way we can monitor it. And then, just to close that, we are confident that we can provide adequate volume and pressure to the city of Marina in the event of a fire. So with that, that's the presentation, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions, or Tony or our general managers here as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Akel and Derek. Let's go to Mayor Pro Tem Kathy Biala.
You, Mr. Mayor. Well, this has been really a fabulously informative presentation. I really have not understood so much about the water system with fire management. So this is a real eye-opener, and I want to express my ignorance about those storage tanks. I knew it was water in there, but I didn't really understand what it was for, and now I do. I'm really pleased to see the redundancy, but also the storage capacities and the interconnectedness between zone A and B, for example, of sharing some of the flows. I've been very impressed by hearing all of this. Is the potable water system, is it really separated out from fire responses? So like those storage tanks, are they only used for fire, so that even if we needed, some potable water, at some point in the future, that is not to be touched, that water is completely dedicated for fire management?
No, so I can touch on that. So no, it is our normal storage for just our regular consumption of water. And so we are on a continuously basis turning those reservoirs over, obviously for water quality issues, because it does go into the potable network. And so as we drain those tanks down to meet demand during the day, we will fill those tanks back up, typically in our off-peak hours of PG&E, to reduce costs to the district and our ratepayers, to fill those tanks back up. But we don't drain those tanks, halfway or a quarter way. We keep enough storage capacity in there to fight a fire and to meet our normal operating and consumption. And I will turn it over to the general manager.
So, Mayor Pro Tem, I think where Derek's headed is that when we design a tank, a certain portion of the tank is dedicated to firefighting capacity. We operate the rest of that tank as our normal operational day. But I think to the point here is that one of the things that we really wanted to make sure, and that we learned from Santa Rosa and the Coffee Fire and some of the Sierra fires, was that when the fire department rolls on the fire, the water district has to immediately begin to respond. It has to start to charge its tanks. It has to start making sure that the assets are ready to combat the fire. That's where some of these systems fell down, where fire departments move in on the fire and they don't know where the water system assets are. and the water system operators aren't connected to the incident command. So the infrastructure is designed to support the fire. Those tanks, a portion of them are dedicated to fire capacity. And then that additional capacity, that what we'll call the treated water capacity that's in them, we want to make sure that when Doug needs it, that it's there and it's ready for him.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I also know that some criticisms of maybe other system providers of water are criticized because of their lack of continual maintenance of the infrastructure. And so that if there's a takeover, let's say that they discover that a lot of the pipes really should have been replaced and have degraded in such a way that, you know, that's not a true value for their assets. So you kind of said, you know, you monitor any kind of leaks or degradation of the pipes, but is there a time, regardless of what, you know, the data, the monitoring is showing, that you're scheduled to replace pipes, or does it only happen because you're noticing things about a particular pipe?
So I think, do you want me to answer that one, Derek?
Yeah.
All right. So the first statement, or the first question, is the difference between a public water system, which is operated for reliability, and a private water system, which is operated for stakeholders. So they run their system to fail because they make money off of new capital. Our job is to ensure that the system is 100% operational all the time, so it's there when you need it. For us at the district, our renewal and replacement program is designed to take certain assets out of the system when they've reached the end of their useful life. And we want to do that, Mayor Pro Tem, before they fail. Anytime an asset fails, it costs the district roughly 3 times what it would cost if we took care of it in the orderly passage of business, right? So we want to replace our valves when they need to be replaced, when they're showing signs of failure. And so Derek and his team we use CityWorks, which is our computerized maintenance and monitoring system, to start to track our assets. And so right now, the district is in the process of developing that asset list so that we're now tracking when certain things need to be cycled out of the system.
That's so great to hear. Thank you. One last question. So we initially spoke about an annual inspection, but now that I've heard so much of what MCWD is already doing with SCADA and the master plan monitoring and all of that, it seems to me less important than when I first started, you know, hearing that we were lacking an annual inspection. So am I correct in assuming that some of what seemed to be just a simple kind of reaction to, gee, we should be monitoring annually, is really not as critical, because we are monitoring almost every day, every hour, some aspect of the water flows and capabilities of the infrastructure. Is that a better assumption on our part, now that we know so much of what MCWD is already doing?
I think that you're speaking to prioritization. And I think that's a fair characterization, in that Derek and his team are watching the system 24/7. They know where it is in terms of its levels. They know what pumps are running. They know what system pressures are, what the pressure reducing stations are set at. So think of it as a cake. You've got higher zones that are feeding lower zones. So you have not only the water that's in the tankage, but you have all of those zones above you. I think with the hydrant, it's always important to have them in an asset management program. We want Doug and his team to be able to drive up to a hydrant and, with a high level of surety, reliability, know that when they hit that hydrant's going to work. And if that hydrant should fail, meaning as one did at the Reservation Road fire, the operating stem broke. That's a mechanical failure. They happen. But his team knows that they can go 300 feet in either direction and there'll be another hydrant. So that means that, you know, the percentages are dropping in terms of risk. But Derek's program will touch all of the hydrants annually, and we'll ensure, we'll do it. You're always doing your best. They will be greased. The taps will be checked. they will be flowed. It doesn't mean that one won't fail when we finally ask it to do its work, but we know that there are other hydrants nearby to carry the load.
Thank you. That's all, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. I appreciate the work that probably went into this presentation. It took, whatever it took, 45 minutes, an hour, but a lot more time goes into it to bring it down to size so it can be digestible to us. So I really appreciate all the work that went into it. My only question regards your last slide. You said in the last slide that MCWD is confident that you can provide the water and the pressure, the volume that's needed in case of a fire. And my question is, has there ever been an instance that you recall where you didn't have enough volume or pressure to adequately give the fire department what they needed during an incident?
I can confidently say since I've been here, that's a no.
How long is that, Derek?
4 years.
Okay.
So,
Right,
and I've never heard of a situation in the past either. So I'm unaware of a time that we haven't been able to provide adequate volume of pressure. I think
that might be the bottom line for residents. Great, we're glad you're confident. We're glad you have all these systems in place. What's your track record? Because if that was significantly different, then there would still be a concern that you're confident, yet reality is that we've had failures. So Lane or anyone else on this panel, are you aware of any time or incident when there was not adequate provision of volume, pressure, et cetera, to serve our fire department's needs?
Mr. Mayor, if I may, the only time we've had an issue, I've been here, believe it or not, 7 years now, or 7 years at the end of this month, with numerous fires. We have not had an issue with water. We had a broken hydrant on the reservation road, but that was not a water system volume. That was the maintenance item that Mayor Pro Tem talked about that hopefully would have been found on that. And to my knowledge, from talking to Chief Kelly and Chief Hinckley before, water has not been an issue in any fire that we've had in the city of Marina.
Okay, I think that's the bottom line. But let's now go to the public. Thank you for being patient. Let's start with Denise Turley, then we'll go to Tommy Bolea. Good evening, Denise.
Hey, good evening. Back to the beginning of that presentation, I heard 1,500 instead of 15,000 in that very first paragraph for the city of Marina. Anyway, just to comment on that. So recently, where I live, which is in Preston Park, we've had 2 incidences where turned the tap on, didn't have any water. One of which was scheduled maintenance either on the hydrant or the laterals or the collaterals or somewhere on our street within the last 2 months. Second one was the other day when there was either a water main break or a hydrant hit somewhere in the vicinity of Broston and Abrams. So my question is, whose responsibility once you respond to an outage and you see that water's going to have to be turned off because the pressure is so low or repair is going to be done, since the individual residents here are direct customers of the water district, why isn't some kind of a warning by street, say 4 streets, why doesn't that happen? Or actually, if it's not your responsibility, whose responsibility is it? Question 1. Question 2 is, I will tell you straight up that if someone hits and maybe damages a fire hydrant, they ain't going to be the one calling you. But if a neighbor notices it, is it important enough that it's obvious that someone has hit a fire hydrant? Should that be reported? And who should that be reported to? The water district, the fire department, the city, public works, who? Those are my two questions. Thank you for an informative presentation.
All right. Thank you very much, Denise. And although those might not be directly fire related, we'll see what kind of answers we can get tonight. Sounds like we have the
Okay.
right people on hand. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you.
All right, let's go to Tommy Balea. Good evening, Tommy.
Good evening, gentlemen. Nice report this evening. Just a couple questions, get to the point. So if anybody hits a fire hydrant, does the current system, either the old part of Marina or the new part, if somebody does hit a fire hydrant, it happens, is there check valves, automatically shuts off? Or does somebody have to go there and actually shut the valve off? Because that could be a scenario where that could happen and then you have a fire using another fire hydrant. Just a question, I don't know if Marina has it in the old part of town, or maybe you're installing them on the new part. And the next question is, you mentioned about SCADA, kind of understand that, monitoring pressure, got that. Now you have an earthquake, power goes out. Now, does SCADA monitor, obviously power, but can it still turn on generators to turn on pumps to maintain that pressure? Or what happens in that scenario? Or does everything just go black and there is no backup? I'm assuming SCADA has backup, I know that. But pumps have generators. Are they set up to be automatically to turn on? Or is it somebody has to go there and turn on, put gas in? And that's the kind of scenario that I'm thinking of. And again, if everything does have a power backup, I think of worst case, we've had a couple big earthquakes over time. And is any of the existing in the old part of Marina, any of the fire lines, water lines have been replaced? And you talk about increasing pressure when a fire hydrant is used. I understand that part, but is there a point where too much pressure is going to cause problems in the line and could burst a pipe? I think those are my questions so far for this evening. Sounds like, and I'm assuming the last question is, as Marina grows, I'm assuming the pumps are able to keep up. You got a lot more houses, a lot more fire hydrants. I'm assuming either you're going to get more wells or you're going to be pumping more. And I guess the last question is you have those tanks, so I'm assuming it's a gravity fed system. And I guess the last question, is there been any thought of the water that leaks out of the wastewater treatment facility? I know that goes through Marina, but can Marina grab any of that water and store it? As far as for earthquakes or emergencies, where if it's up high, you can draw off it and fill up fire trucks and go to fires. I don't know, or maintain pressure in water lines. Those are my questions. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much, Tommy. Let's go to Peter Lay. Hello, Peter. Good evening.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council members. I will go quickly through my question and comment. Question 1, who inspect, maintain, test flow, flushing, and replace public fire hydrants? 2, who own public fire hydrants? 3, show the fire hydrant flow measurement taken by ISO in July 2019 and the ISO letter informing the city and MCWD of the result of their fire hydrant flow measurement and their decision. 4, did Insurance Services Office ask city and MCW about fire hydrant inspection and flow testing? 5, what did city and MCWD tell ISO about fire hydrant inspection and testing? 6, did ISO evaluate and comment on compliance of state and local laws and National Fire Protection Association standards by CD and MCWD. 7, the fire chief commented on the mechanical problem without the fire hydrant. At a recent council meeting on a fire, please provide detail. 8, city manager proposed $15 million for a new fire station, $18 million for a second fire station, and $1.5 million for a new ladder truck at a recent council meeting. So total about $34.5 million. 9, a lot of money for fire department and not much money for police department, which has higher priority. 10, explain actual mitigation of flow deficiency from the construction of 2 new reservoirs on CSUMB as described by the engineering consultant, and show actual model fire flow and graph instead of guessing by MCWD director and staff. 11, fire flow efficiency will be improved after the construction of a new 12-inch water pipeline Del Monte Boulevard extension. How much improvement in fire flow will be achieved by this pipeline for Central Marina? 12, show fire flow efficiency after the construction of the 2 new reservoirs and the new water pipeline. Why not providing all relevant information on fire flow efficiency to ratepayers? 13, the fire flow deficiency arose in July 2019 as a result of measurement by ISO. What has been done by CD and MCWD since 2019? 14, when will Marina get adequate fire flow as required by CD and Marina? 15, through street, late court everywhere, Hillyway, Koski Drive have not received adequate fire responses since 1975. 16, Central Marina did not have adequate fire flow as specified Marina since 1969 based on 2 recent engineer study and my research and knowledge of the water system. I have 3 more questions, so I ask the council give me 60 more seconds at the end of the public comments, or you give me 60 seconds now so I can finish 4 more questions.
You have 27 seconds left, Peter. Can you try to ask those 3 questions?
Yeah, a lot of people asking my motives in raising the fire issue, and I provide my response to Grant Wilson. 18, where do fire flow requirement by City Marina come from? Which section of the Marina Municipal Code or Fire Code? Similarly, where is the written detail of the fire time response standard 4 minutes? Which code? 19, did Marina adopt the National Fire Protection Association standard on fire hydrant inspection, flushing, test flow? And so the last question, did MCWD adopt American Water Works Association standard on fire hydrant inspection and testing? If so, when? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Peter. Let's go to Jeffrey Markham.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for everybody that presented tonight. I'd like to thank resident Peter Lee for the work that he's put into this issue. It's very important. And one of the ISO components is about community involvement and making sure that our community concerns are addressed in our ISO rating. This is an area that I think the city of Marina could have done a better job on. And I think putting these assets up on the Marina website so that everybody can understand, where we got here and how we got our rating. It affects all of us, our insurance premiums and everything. One other question is future projections. We all know our climate is drying up and our wells might be under stress. Has the Marina Water District gone through the projections in the future about what it's going to stress our system on in terms of increased residences and our well system? That's all I have.
All right, thank you very much, Jeffrey. We'll give everyone a couple more moments for those who haven't spoken to raise their hand, and then we'll close public comment. All right, we'll close public comment. And Denise started it off. She asked a couple of questions indirectly related to fire. Who do we contact if fire hydrants are hit? And do residents get notices if their water supply will be shut off for maintenance or repairs?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to answer part and let the Marina Coast Water answer part. It's kind of related, but if somebody sees a vehicle hit a fire hydrant, just call 911. And, we will come out, and also Marina Coast Water will be immediately notified and send appropriate people come out. And we also let Marina Coast answer the other questions she asked, who calls residents and everything else. But because we want a system in place that's 24/7, the fire department does not have an after hours phone number. So even if you need a response from the fire department, for example, right now, in this, even a non-emergency, so to speak, you need to call 911. And the dispatch center will notify Marina Coast Water. They're going to notify us to come out and see if make sure it's not cracking and ready to leak, or, and we'll work, turn it over to Marina Coast Water. So I want to let Marina Coast talk on that and answer the other questions on the notifying residents and things of that nature.
Thank you, Chief. And also to piggyback off that on a notification on if a hydrant's hit, or say there's an issue with the hydrant. A lot of times it could be Marine Coast staff or a contractor. We open a hydrant and then we go to shut it, and maybe it just doesn't shut all the way, and sometimes you'll see it leaking. And so residents will want to call on that so we can go out there and fix it. So our customer service is open during normal hours. On top of that, we have an answering service, which is the exact same phone number as the customer service line that responds 24/7, and we'll send that call out to one of our standby operators. So everyone is aware of that number that's here for the public and watching. It's 831-384-6131. And again, you can call during normal hours and you'll reach our live customer service staff, MCWD representatives. And then after hours, we have a call center that will dispatch calls out to our operator. However, as the chief mentioned, if it's a fire hydrant and it's hit and it's blowing out, call 911 and the fire department's going to respond, lights sirens. They're going to get a hold of MCWD right away, and then we'll be responding right behind them. So hopefully that answers that question. The other one, the question that Denise had was on the notification of outages, I believe. And so really that's kind of twofold. It depends on what the outage is. So if Marina Coast Water District is going out, we're going to do planned maintenance or repair on the system. Maybe there's a valve broken. We need to do shutdown of the area. Depending on where we're at, it could be a large shutdown or it could be isolated to a smaller area. We're going to notify each customer 72 hours in advance, and we're going to hang door tags on the residents. The other situation that happens sometimes, and that's what happened the other day on Lexington Court, is things out of our control, such as a main break. And so in a case like that we have to go out and shut down a section of a main, putting out residents, we actually send an operator door to door to knock on the door and let them know, hey, we have this issue going on, this main break, this is the anticipated outage, and then we'll keep them informed via social media. They can always call our customer service as well. So if it's planned, we'll hang door tags and notify. Unfortunately, things happen and not everything's planned. If it's an emergency, we send operators door to door to let them know. Hopefully that answers questions.
You want to just roll right into some of Tommy's questions and fall right in your belly about the check valves, the hydrants that have check valves and ones that don't, and then also about the power outage and water lines.
Yeah, sure, I can touch on that. So on the check valves, yeah, so our standard is all new hydrants have a check valve in it. And so if a hydrant gets hit, that check springs. you'll see a little stream of water coming out. The reason for that is that way when we're driving by or residents driving by, when that hydrant's hanging in the bushes or underneath a bumper, we know it actually got hit. So that it's supposed to stream out like that. It lets us know the hydrant got hit. There are a lot of areas that do not have these check valves in them. And so we have to go out and manually shut down valves. Anytime that we do a renewal or replacement or a capital improvement project, and hydrants is part of that component, they will get upgraded to a hydrant with a check valve. So that is our standard, one, to minimize water loss, and two, just to maintain the water and the pipe for firefighting purposes. The other one was the power outages. And so that was a very good question. The district recently did, back in 2020, a very large generator project. They were very proactive in regards to PG&E, PSPS, where they're going out and shutting down large areas for wildfire prevention. And so as part of that project, we installed 7 large new gen sets, got additional tow behinds, revamped our entire existing generators, switched everything over to automatic control, and then integrated all that data into our SCADA. And so really what that means is if there's a large power outage, like for instance, it was about a year ago, maybe a year and a half, we had the entire peninsula, that rolling blackouts, everything ran perfectly. That generator project really worked out well in our favor. And it's not just on the water side, we have them on the wastewater too. So we can run 24/7 off our generators and feed our customers water and demand for our fire pumps or fire system. And then we can monitor all that stuff live via our SCADA as well. So we know when a generator is running, we know if a generator faults, we know if the automatic transfer switch doesn't switch over. And so we have all that data coming in now as part of that big project we did in 2020.
All right. Tommy also asked if there's been any water lines replaced, especially on Fort Ord. I think that was one of his questions.
Definitely a lot in Fort Ord. So there are pretty extensive capital improvement projects in the Fort Ord area because of the Army infrastructure. So there have been water lines replaced. There is a 5-year CIP that the district adopts every year, an annual, and some of that is replacement of some of these water lines. And so as we are crafting this year's budget, and General Manager may touch on this a little bit more, we are looking at R&R within our system and getting to a point of doing X amount of percentage of pipe a year. And so the short answer is yes, we have replaced pipelines in the York community.
Okay.
You also asked about purple water pipe. Unit 1.
Yeah, I think the question was regard to using sewage flows from the wastewater plant, the reclamation, and whether that can be used for fire. So they are somewhat independent systems right now, but we do have 2 million gallons of storage in our non-potable reservoir. And then those feed for recycle water customers. Those systems are not interconnected, so they are completely isolated of our fire hydrant for cross connection reasons. But there is storage in the recycle water network of 2 million gallons that we own.
All right. Tommy and Jeff asked if we have plans to keep up with the growth as far as our water supply. Not our water supply, but our, the infrastructure that's delivering the water for fire purposes.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead. The short answer is yes. So every 5 years, we do our urban water management plan. We have our master planning tools in place. Our renewal and replacement reliability programs are centered around the wells that Derek and his team are maintaining. So we are prepared, and we're looking out to 2040 and 2050 in terms of what the system need is, how the population is growing, where that water supply is going to come from.
All right. And Rem, when we have a a new project coming online, which comprises most of our growth. You know, we have Sea Haven, we have the Dunes, we have Hampton Inn. Do we always have water supply assessments, water supply reports and projections before we approve those?
If they're large ones, like the ones that you mentioned, yes. If they're smaller ones that don't have a significant impact on the supply, then the answer is no. But generally it's, you know, as you know, the cities are the ones that control the 6,600 acre feet that FORA allocated. And so that's a part of that calculation. So if it's a large subdivision like Sea Haven or the Dunes, they get a WSA, water supply assessment.
Okay, so I think when most people think of growth in Marina, they're thinking of those large projects. However, if I were to build a new home down the street on an empty lot, that wouldn't require MCWD to do MCWD doesn't require a water supply assessment for me to build a new house. But if I was to do a large project, they would.
That's correct, right? The same is true also, Mr. Mayor, that if they want an ADU, they don't have to do a water supply assessment. They're only coming to the district for a single meter and to the city. And so that capacity allocation is easy in terms of.
Okay, so an accessory dwelling unit or a granny unit, as they're also called, that
Yes.
wouldn't trigger a water supply assessment because it's not significant enough to make an impact on our system.
Correct.
Okay, all right, and then Peter Lay had a lot of questions, and there's no way I could write them down, but he has submitted questions in, you know, a couple times in September, once in November, a couple times in November, 3 times in November, and he hasn't received the responses to those questions, I think because staff just doesn't have the time to respond to every question from the public. So largely to help Peter understand what the city's responses are, we've had tonight to try to satisfy that. Are there any questions that anyone wrote down? Because I couldn't write them down fast enough that you'd like to address that Peter Lay asked?
Actually, Mayor, what I would suggest is if Peter can send us those questions again. I know the Water District has answered a lot of his questions previously, but if he can email us those questions, we'll get together with the Water District and we'll provide him an answer to those questions.
Okay. All right. I'm looking through a lot of his emails, and in each email often includes different questions or new questions. But here's an example of one that seems important to me. I mean, they're all important, but I couldn't remember them all or write them down fast enough. But I'm looking at his emails, and one of them says that the ESCI, which I think was our consultant that we paid to do a fire study. What does ESCI stand for, Doug, just so I'm not using acronyms?
Emergency Services Consulting International.
Okay, so Emergency Services Consulting International recommends that a first response unit should arrive at a priority fire or a special incident within 5 minutes and 20 seconds, 90% of the time.
Yes.
And that our current performance is not 5 minutes, 20 seconds, but it's 8 minutes and 2 seconds.
Correct.
So it's about 3 minutes slower than what's recommended. How important is that?
Mr. Mayor, it's very important. If you look at I would need to show you, I could show you visually in some other graphs, but, the fire, when it starts going through an incipient phase, then it starts growing exponentially. And that's why we talked about the need for the fire station to relocate or put a station in South Marina. That's why I'm so concerned when, Palm, moves their station down the road a little ways. It's very important. And also for the medical side, too, we need to, it's proven that we need to be there in a timely manner, and so that's in that 5 minutes, 20 seconds, 5 minutes for a medical aid. That comes from, that's where we use 4-minute drive time. That includes the time someone called, pick up the phone, call 911, and then they process the call, dispatch us, we get in our personal protective equipment and go and respond to the fire.
Okay, and Peter has distinguished, as I believe that the ESCI distinguished between priority fire / special operations incident, which we just talked about. And then the other side, the second, was all other priority incidents. And those needed to be within 5 minutes to meet the recommendation. And we take within 10 minutes. So we might be up to 5 minutes slower. But I'm a little confused because it seems like priority fire and special operations incident, you'd want to be there quicker than all other priority incidents. Can you explain to me why that's not so?
I would need to pull out that study. I don't have it in front of me to say exactly, but basically, if you look at a medical aid as one of those priority calls, it's 5 minutes because of the what time, from the time we get the call till the time we arrive, want to be there. Other priority calls, for example, the fire hydrant, it's a priority call, but we're not going to go code 3. We're not going to go lights and siren to that type of call. We're going to go to code 2. The 20 seconds extra for going to a structure fire, 5 minutes, 20 seconds, that's so we can put on all our equipment. We put on more equipment, more personal protective equipment than we're going to go to a medical aid. So they're all important, and we respond as quickly as possible to each call. But we have areas that are outside of our the 4 minutes, and those are the studies we looked at. In fact, I think one of our last special meetings we had when we were talking about the need for the fire station and the truck and the personnel and the fire marshal, all those things.
Okay, so yeah, that brings it to the higher level of, beyond the statistics, but it brings it to what are we going to do about it as a city? And you and Lane and other staff have recommended many assets that we don't have that we do need, such as a fully staffed second fire company. Right now, we have a sort of a halfway staffed second fire company, and that's going to cost us something like $1.6 million more every year to fully staff that. And then we need 2 new fire stations, one toward the Fort Ord end of things like California and 3rd Avenue. I'm so sorry, 3rd Avenue and Imgen Parkway, and one toward the north near Vince DiMaggio Park. And those each, as Peter said tonight in his comments, those total tens of millions of dollars, which we don't really have. And so one thing that the city council and our management staff are trying to do is figure out how to afford those assets that would solve this issue of response time where we are slower than is recommended. But that's not going to happen overnight. It'll probably require citizens to say yes to a bond measure. If they say no to a bond measure, we might not see those assets for a while. Maybe we'll be able to find the 1.6 million for recurring staff salaries and benefits, but the 2 fire stations, that's going to be hard for us to find those tens of millions. But I know that that's what we think we need to do, and that's what we're trying to figure out how to afford to take care of that. Well, moving on to all the rest of Peter's questions, I would guess that Peter is probably feeling frustrated because he has asked questions many times, and he probably thought tonight was going to be the night that he would get those answered. But I think that tonight may have answered some of his questions, and so he may have a residual set of questions, and he should send those in to us, like the ones he wrote tonight. Hopefully, I'm sure he probably had those written down. But if he sends those questions in to us, I think we'll do the best we can to answer them, but we can't promise that we'll be able to answer every question that every citizen has, because we just have a lot of staff needs that they have to take care of day-to-day business. And I'm sure it's the same for Marina Coast Water District. So Peter, please do send in those questions. And I suppose that staff at both organizations will do their best to get your answers. Were there any questions that I neglected to mention in my rundown besides?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
I
go ahead.
addressed one of Mr. Lee's questions, though I just he said that we have an ISO rating of 6. And that is incorrect. We have an ISO rating of 3. And the whole report is on the website. If they go to the fire department, go to the ISO, and they can click on the link, and the letter showing our ISO rating and the full report is there. And then people can review it. You know, I think that what he's referring to was when they came in and did a test at one time, they didn't flow the hydrants properly. And we got some bad data. So bad data in, bad data out. And we realized, talked to the people who did it, and we went out, performed the test correctly. We redid the test, sent it all back in, and that's when ISO said, oh, you're good. That's when they come back in, and we retained our ISO rating of 3. So it's there for anybody to look at, and it is not a 6, it is a 3 wide.
All right. Thank you, Doug, and to everybody for joining us tonight from the public. And thanks to everyone from MCWD, especially the elected officials, the directors. You know, they have a lot going on, and all the residents. And Peter, for all of your persistent questions. I hope that there's an end in sight. If you can send those to us one more time, the ones that are residual. And to everyone that showed up tonight, we really appreciate you showing up. And to Tony, thank you for being the consultant you are to MCWD. And Carlos, we're still glad we have you. Welcome aboard. And Tina, you're out there somewhere. And we really appreciate everyone who's joined us tonight. And Rem, we're sure lucky we got you. We missed Keith. He was great general manager, and we were worried. We're not so worried anymore. So thank you for all the competency you bring. And there's Eddie Anderson. Thank you, Eddie, for having the interest to hear through this tonight. Brian McMinn, our Public Works Director. Our new Public Works Director, the old guy, had a beard. You might remember, not this one. All right, Tina. So good night, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.